What's going on, folks? It's time for a quick little sound design video. Synth brass. It's everywhere. It's not just in 80s music. It's actually in a lot of music beyond that, because synth brass is just a synthesized sound that's meant to sound like a brass instrument, like a trombone, trumpet, a whole horn section, and the like. The form you might be thinking of is a very, very specific type made by certain subtractive synthesizers, but there are so many more ways to make synth brass sound, and I'm going to cover 5 of them. Here we go. First one, simple and basic. This is probably the one that you're most familiar with. It's a very simple sound, and it involves a waveform and a filter through subtractive synthesis. I have here OBX. Doesn't really matter which you use. You just want, your basic synth waveforms and a filter. So with an initialized patch here, it just sounds like this. What I'm going to do is change a few things. I want the filter to track, so we're going to bring that knob all the way up. Now the whole thing sounds very bright. I'll show you why that's important a little later. But it sounds very basic. It just sounds like a gated, open synth sound. To give it a bit more of a brassy quality, I'm going to go over here into the loudness envelope and slowly attack a bit. And I'm also going to add a little bit of release. It also sounds a bit like a synth strings because it's very open and very bright and the sound is very consistent. So let's go over to the filter. We're going to bring the cutoff down. Add some modulation. And you can hear the filter's opening up a bit. I'm going to extend the decay, bring the sustain level of the filter up a little bit, increase the release, and increase the attack a little bit. And bring the cutoff down even further, and the sound sounds like this. It's a very simple sound. That is the bare minimum that you get with a synth brass. To shape it even further, we're going to add some resonance, of course. If you want it to sound even funkier, add a bit more resonance. But we don't need to do that much. Round here is fine. A lot of synths sometimes would only have one oscillator, but you can have as many oscillators as you want. If we add a second oscillator and detune it a bit, we have this. A little bit of a chorusy horn section. If you want to add a little bit more complexity to a sound like this, if you have more than one oscillator, you could take one of them, change it from a sawtooth to a pulse wave, and add some pulse width. With this type of sound, you can also change how you want to affect the attack of the sound. For a snappy trumpet, you want to bring the attack of the filter and the loudness down so that it's much quicker. But if you wanted something slower, like that of maybe a synthetic French horn or something, you could bring the attack up a bit for both. If you're using a synth that has different envelopes for the loudness and the filter, you could change the attack and decay stages of both so that you might have a snappy attack for the sound, but maybe a slower attack for something like this. Of course, both can be snappy like this. Now, I mentioned filter tracking. The one reason it's important is it controls how much of the filter is open up depending on where you play on the keyboard. If you want your sound to get brighter with the higher notes that you play, you track it to the keyboard. And when you do that, the lower notes you play are going to be softer. Pitch brass. This next method can be used for any form of synthesis for your synth brass sound. I'm just going to show you with OBX because I already have this set up. So the way this works is you take a second oscillator. This does require more than one oscillator, and you apply a pitch envelope to it. Depending on the synth that you use, there may not be a dedicated pitch envelope, but you may be able to modulate the pitch using a previously used envelope, like one for the filter. With this, I have a separate envelope, and it affects the sound in a way that it goes like this. At the beginning, there's just a little bit of a blip in the pitch of this sound, which is why in the 80s this was referred to as a blip brass. If you're able to change the decay of the pitch envelope, if you have a pitch envelope, you can change it so that it's slower and a bit more detuned for longer. Or you can make it really snappy. You can change how much of the pitch is being modulated, even to cartoonish levels like this. In this example, I'm offsetting the pitch of the second oscillator so that it jumps up and then comes down again later. And I can set the decay of that so that it sounds really tight at the beginning, or I can have it so that it sounds very detuned the longer it plays, and it almost sounds like a chorused horn section instead of a single instrument. Very drunk sounding. FM and more. FM can actually do a lot more than subtractive synthesis can do because it involves a very modular approach. It involves as many oscillators as your synthesizer will allow you to have, and you can route them into each other in any combination that you want. With something like Phase Plant, which is very modular, you can have any number of oscillators routed into anything else. And of course, unlike with the older hardware FM synths from the 80s, you don't have to stick with just sine waves like I am here. You could have sawtooth, pulse, triangle, and sine, or any other complex wave. To go as simple as we possibly can with FM, let's work with a 2-oscillator synth. Or in the FM world, these would be referred to as operators. And we have something like this. Doesn't sound very brassy, but that's because we haven't done anything with any envelopes yet. Now, the way it works with FM is that it involves no filters, but every oscillator has its own envelope, and we can control that shape here. So what this is going to sound like is this. To give it brassy, slow the attack, bring the sustain up a bit. And that is the simplest you can get with FM, and only 2 oscillators. But if we were to do a little bit more with this, we can add in any number of other oscillators to modulate what we have here. And it doesn't really matter what we modulate, just as long as we can get something that is brassy. Like for instance, adding a sawtooth wave right here, and then modulating the first modulator in this modular carrier pair. We have the envelope doing this, so that the overall sound is something a little bit brighter than what we had before, like this. And this is barely scratching the surface if you want to get into FM. I have another video on that, by the way. With the more oscillators that you add to your FM sound, the more complex it could be, or it could be pretty subdued, like this. Most of what I have here is really just shaping the sound with different sine waves, with one of them being a very, very light attack in the beginning of the sound at a very strange harmonic tuning ratio. Now, if I were to have this going so you could hear it and turn everything else off, on its own, it sounds like that. But in the group, it sounds like this. I can exaggerate how much it's modulating the first oscillator. And still kind of get a coolish type of sound. I don't know if it's brassy anymore, but it's cool. Wavetables and Resynthesis. It's a method that is used in stuff like Phase Plant, also Vital, I believe, Serum, and things like that. Essentially, it is a waveform where when you progress through the wave, the actual shape of the waveform can change. And this can lead to very complex sounds, or it can be as simple as going from a sine wave to a sawtooth-like wave, like in this example right here.
Thank you.
Now what I have going on is an envelope controlling the position of the actual wavetable while it's playing. And it almost gives the effect very similar to a filter on a sawtooth wave, except this one's a little bit different. Since it's not actually a smooth filter, it's between two different wave states, sine and sawtooth. Which leads me to the second part of this, resynthesis. What it involves is taking a sample of recorded audio and converting it into a synthesized sound. What's cool about resynthesis to me is that you take a sample, you convert it into a synthesized sound, and what it basically does is it removes some of the limitations that you get with sampling. Because let's say you only have one sample. If you were to play that sample up a couple octaves, it's going to speed it up, but you're also going to get some digital artifacts because you're also increasing the sample rate. And you'll be doing the opposite when you play even lower notes, and there will be digital artifacts down there. But if you convert it into a synthesized sound, those issues are going to be gone because it's now synthesizing it. And what's cool about Phaseplant is that its wavetable module, which is why these are linked, can actually do that with samples. If I drop a trumpet sample into this, it will sound like this. What I've got here is basically a trumpet sample turned into a waveform, and it's now able to be played at high notes and low notes without those kind of weird digital aliasing sounds that would come from the sample. And what's cool about this is that you can actually get closer to the waveform of an actual trumpet because you're using a sample of an actual trumpet. Well, at least in this example I am. But you could, theoretically, use other samples that have a lot of harmonic overtones and maybe even a bit noisy and convert them into a waveform, add some filtering, maybe even emphasize some frequencies with a lot of resonance, and get a brassy-like sound, similar to this. Now, what if you were to mix the best parts from both samples and synthesis with sample and synthesis? In the last example, I used a sample that sounds like this, which is fine, it's bright, but it might be a little thin. Well, how about maybe adding some body with a couple of synth sounds, like a sawtooth and a sine wave filtered out a little bit. Or if you wanted to have a sound with a realistic trumpet attack and the rest of the sound completely synthesized in the style of the D50, do something like this. Those are just some of the methods to get different forms of synth brass sound. There are so many more out there, but I only promised 5. So there's 5. I'll see you later. Bye.